Let's face it, you are more than a resume. You have a personality and things about you which just cannot be captured on paper. On this podcast, we are working to humanize the hiring experience by giving you a voice. So let's talk, learn from one another, and find that next great opportunity. I'm your host, Eric Ryan Jones, and this is Fired Before Christmas. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fired Before Christmas podcast. Today, I have with me Cooper Kearns, who is probably one of the shortest unemployed people we've ever had on the show. She was unemployed for a week when we started this interview, but now she is gainfully employed. But we're still going to talk to her, and we're going to learn all about her as well as her take on the whole COVID and everything else that's going on. So, Cooper, why don't you go ahead and give us a good introduction on yourself?
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me this morning. I really appreciate it. A little bit about my background. I actually started out in marketing and advertising, and I did that for 3 years. Ended up in a situation where I was like, I kind of want to try something different. So I went into a staffing agency, and they asked me to stay and actually work internally with them as a recruiter. So did that for 2 years and loved it. Really was very fulfilled in terms of what I was doing. Nothing really more rewarding than getting somebody a job, right? So really, really loved that. And unfortunately, due to COVID, our company was affected with a 20% company-wide layoff. And so about 100 people were laid off, both, recruiters and our account side. And I was one of the unlucky folks in that layoff. So,
but they brought you back.
Yeah. They brought me back. Less than a week later, my boss, I got a text from my boss saying, "Hey, do you have a minute to chat?" And I thought it was going to be a call about going and picking up my stuff from the office, since we were all working remotely due to COVID. Had to obviously get something coordinated to actually go in, get all my stuff from my desk. So I picked up, and that's when she was like, "Hey, so there's been a change. We got an opening back on our team, and I told you you'd be the first person I would call." So she gave me a call, and I accepted after kind of taking the weekend to think about things, and decided that for the time being, definitely right back where I wanted to be. So
as someone that was recently let go, what was kind of going through your mind during that first week, that you didn't know that they were going to be bringing you back and everything? Kind of talk us about the emotions, what was going through your mind, your plans, and just kind of how you were coping with it.
Yeah, no, great question. So for me, it was pretty crazy because so much of what I love to do about my job is the people that I was meeting with, and everybody. I loved my team, and it was a great thing for me to do every single day going to work. I loved it. So when I got that call, I just sat there, and my face it was a FaceTime, so my face just went blank. And my boss was like, "Well, it's not due to performance. Like, we want you to know it's really not due to performance at all." And I was like, "Well, then, I'm confused even more so. If it's not due to performance, then why am I being let go?" And so it was just a very confusing time, and never really getting a full answer as to why the layoff happened was probably the biggest thing for me. Not really having any idea why it had happened, besides the fact that it was mandated by the company. So just a really confusing week. But, actually by the time she called me back, I was kind of like, all right, I've got this. Like, I'm ready to kind of start that hunt back up again, and gave myself that week to kind of fully think about things, updated my resume, all of that, and was really ready to hit the ground running. And had already started applying and had a couple of interviews lined up. But it was a confusing time because, especially in corporate America, so much of who we are is based around our career. And so when your career is taken from you, part of your identity is taken from you. And so having to deal with that, I was very, very confused.
I bet. So you had a plan, though, to get started before you got the job offer back. Kind of what was your go-to plan? As a recruiter, you probably have more insight into what other recruiters are looking for and what that attack plan should be. So kind of talk to what your plan was, and maybe any advice that you would want to give someone else that was in this world now. Because I know a lot of people have been unemployed for a while now. Yeah. They're kind of stagnant. They're kind of like out of ideas on what do I do now? I've applied as much as I can. What's my next step, as it would be?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me, having been on the staffing side, I think that was definitely an advantage for me. So something that we actually all did, a lot of my colleagues that also got laid off across the country. We are a huge company. So we've got branches in pretty much every major city across the United States. And we all posted about being laid off. We were fully transparent. We said, hey, LinkedIn community, our company laid off 20% of its task force. And I was one of the unlucky ones that it happened to. If you have any leads, if you have any connections, please go ahead and like reach out to me. And so I think that being fully transparent with LinkedIn and kind of, reminding everybody that we're human too. One of my candidates reached out and he was like, wow, we know it's a bad time when even the recruiters are getting laid off. So, that was a good point. And I think for me, it was just being fully transparent with everybody and saying, hey, this happened. And I gained a lot of traction that way because of the full honesty. Everybody wanted to help me. And so kind of on the tactical side, made sure to go ahead and get my resume fully updated. I try to keep it up to date every 6 months, but making sure that was all up to date and getting that over and onto LinkedIn as soon as possible. And then also something that I think a lot of people don't realize, I have a couple of family members that were also laid off. And so I went on to their LinkedIns and they hadn't marked themselves as open to new opportunities. And so that's a kind of section and a feature that LinkedIn utilizes to show recruiters on my side. It doesn't show anybody else, the regular public, but it shows recruiters, hey, I'm out there and I'm looking. And as a recruiter being in that seat, I just utilize that a lot. If somebody says there's a filter button, you can say, open to new opportunities. And that's usually how I start reaching out to people. So that would be my biggest tip for anybody that's currently unemployed is to go ahead and mark themselves as open to new opportunities, because that's something that we majorly utilize in the staffing world.
And that whole idea of posting that you're open to new opportunities and that you're available for work is really big, because that's how I found you. And that's how I've been able to find actually most of the people on this podcast is them posting, me connecting and saying, hey, use my network, come on the podcast, and away they go. So that's great. I'm glad to see that that's working for not just me, but others as well, which is good. So what is it that your company does now, though? What is it that you recruit for? What kind of is your space that you're focused on?
Yeah, so we're solely creative. So creative staffing, marketing, advertising, creative directors, all of that. So that was kind of why I loved my job so much, because the people that I was meeting with, they were doing a lot of the creative campaigns for major corporations and major companies that we see those advertisements every single day, whether it be online or on the TV. And so kind of getting to pick their creative brains and learn more about that was really cool for me. So very specialized, but really cool space to be in.
So I know the industry that you're focusing on has had a big blow to it, the marketing, the advertising space. I just recently interviewed a guy, Brent Baldwin, that was big into marketing. He does a lot of brand marketing. So we know that's an industry that's been hit really big. But obviously, if your company is rehiring you back and maintaining a workforce, then there should still be some life to that market. So where are you seeing availability for people that are in the advertising marketing realm for work?
Yeah. So a lot of what obviously, even before COVID hit, a lot of what was going on is everything was moving digital. So a lot of our companies that we work with that have a presence in the digital space, whether they're an e-commerce company or, digital marketing, digital advertising agency type thing, they haven't been as affected by everything that's been going on. So that's kind of where we've been able to kind of see things continue to pick up. But that's what always happens. Creative is usually the first to be cut because it's not something that is as needed as obviously your finance department or your HR or anything like that. So that's usually where the layoffs happen first. But I think really where we're seeing it pick back up and continue to remain steady is in that e-commerce and digital space.
Okay. Now, if someone was looking to get into that space, they've got a marketing background or they've got an advertising background, what are some things that you typically look for when you're perusing either a LinkedIn profile or a resume? What are some things that usually kind of trigger you to say, yes, this is someone I want to talk to?
Yeah. So what we find really helpful are looking at like certifications. So any type of like Google Analytics, Google AdWords, HubSpot, any of those key kind of, CMS, like content management systems, any familiarity with that, anything digital. The traditional marketing statistics are incredibly impressive. However, traditional marketing is kind of going out the window. And so any type of certifications that you can get that are in that digital space are always extremely helpful. And that's actually something that I've been kind of telling some of my family members who have been laid off. I'm like, go out there, get those certifications, because if you're in that marketing or that advertising space and you have those that show that you've got that digital competency, then you're good to go.
What's the hot certification right now?
I would probably say Google AdWords, Google Analytics, are something that our clients are always kind of looking for. Any type of content management system experience as well. That kind of varies company by company. So some will utilize kind of like HubSpot. Others are going to be using more of like your Salesforce or something like that. So the CMS, as we like to call it, isn't as specific. Any type of experience with that will kind of carry over throughout whatever company you go to. But we usually kind of see Google Analytics, Google AdWords, any type of analytics experience where you can really take a look at the different campaigns that are being put on, really analyze those and say, okay, this person clicked here. We got this many click-throughs on this campaign, blah, 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 blah. And that's kind of where we see the success.
Is there typically a cost associated with those certifications, or are those ones that are offered free of charge?
So I know that at the start of all this, all the certifications were being offered for free. Not all of them, but a couple of them, like the Google ones were being offered for free at the beginning of COVID. I don't know right now if that's still the same. If that's still the same case.
Okay, so there's an opportunity that they could be at discounted rate or whatever. So that's good to know. That's
Yeah.
good. Okay, awesome. So one of the things that we constantly bring back up on this show is trying to stand out from everybody else. And you mentioned certifications, and I know as someone that is in the IT industry, I've got lots of certifications, but I also jokingly say anybody can pass a test, but it's actually applying what you've passed the test for and doing is key. So, but beyond the certifications, is there anything that someone could put out there, either in a cover letter or either in a personal website or something like that, that would kind of help drive their likelihood of being called a little bit higher? I know, like for me, just to give you a personal example, for me, I'm an agilist. So I deal with a lot of scrum masters, product owners, those kind of people. And what I typically want to see is real world experience. And if not, when I get into the interview and I am talking to them, is just how have you applied it in your own life? Are you using Agile in your own life and stuff? Because I jokingly tell people all the time that my family runs Agile. My kids know what a product owner is. They know what a scrum master is. They know that mommy's the product owner because she makes all the decisions.
Yeah.
And that they've got their Kanban board, so they know to move things from to do to done.
Yeah.
So we kind of have that, and that helps out and everything. But is there anything that an advertising person or a marketing person, especially in the digital world, could be doing to kind of show proficiency as it would be in these skill sets?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we always like to see are any type of metrics or analytics statistics that are on your resume. I think that's huge. You can write about everything that you did day in and day out, but if you've run a really successful marketing campaign or email marketing, social media campaign that really drove results, we want to see that on the resume. We saw an increase of 50% click-through rate on this email campaign that I put together in, concept to completion type of thing. Another one that I always like to kind of point on to with the graphic design space is just a really modern and clean kind of portfolio. Obviously, portfolios for graphic design and art directors are what's going to sell them along with the work themselves, or the work itself rather. And so as long as the portfolio is clean, up to date, aesthetic, and have a resume that matches and is very organized, then that's pretty much going to set you apart from anyone else. So for marketing and advertising, really having those statistics and like metrics, whereas on the more creative side, making sure that the way that you're presenting yourself is not just like, here is, a graphic that I did, here's another graphic that I did, but how you're organizing that and making it kind of an experience for the user as well.
So do you see any cool tools that those graphic design people are using? I mean, other than just sending you samples of their work, are they using websites? Are they using like a slide share? I mean, what are they doing to set themselves apart?
Yeah, so they're going on and they're creating an online portfolio. There are a couple, out there that you can utilize to easily make one. Some are doing it custom coding type of thing as well for those that are familiar with that HTML and CSS coding. But for anyone that has like or is looking to get in kind of like the graphic design or artistic space, just even hopping on WordPress and putting your work on there in a kind of fluid and organized manner is better than sending just regular samples that you just kind of took a screen share of or whatever the case may be. And so that's definitely a successful way to kind of market yourself as a creative.
What is something that you would like them to stop doing?
Stop doing? Oh, goodness. That's a good question. Huh. I think getting too creative on their resume, like to the point where the resume is used to kind of showcase what you've done, and sometimes what they've done and their experience will be taken away by, they've got their picture, a huge picture. That's something that is kind of phased out in the recruiting and staffing space is your picture of your face. It's very distracting for somebody that's looking for just to get an initial phone screen and out of the way, to just have like half the resume being your face or a quarter of the top right corner being your face. Or, for the graphic design space, a lot of times, like I kind of said, they look to get a little bit more creative than they need to. And they're kind of like doing design and all of this artistic stuff on their resume. And, for me, and I'm not speaking for all recruiters, this is me specifically, I just want to see the information. I just want to see your experience. There's the portfolio for me to see, your creativity. And then for, the marketing and advertising and any other type of professional that I'm meeting with, the interview portion is when I'll see your face. I don't need to see it on your resume. So I think that that's just definitely something that we're moving away from in the staffing area, is just keeping your resume clean, up to date, modern aesthetic, but not too overfilled with things that aren't going to help you land a job.
Now, when you do your calls and your staffing, are you doing direct placement, or are you contract to hire, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, we do the full gamut. So obviously in the full-time space, as people that are only open to those full-time jobs know, it does take, the process is a lot longer than somebody that goes the contract to hire route. Contract to hire is what I like to refer to as the try before you buy, date before you marry scenario. You're both getting to test each other out. And if it's a match and if it works, then great. At the end of the day, you're there. And so I always tell candidates that come in and originally are just looking for full-time placement, I tell them to definitely think about doing that contract to hire, opening themselves up to that, because it is a benefit for them and it's a benefit for the client as well, because they're both able to kind of test each other, make sure that it's a win on both ends before being fully committed.
Yeah, that contract to hire is a little scary for some people. I know back in the day, I used to always be afraid of it, because it used to be that you would get like, you get a really high pay, but you get like zero benefits. Yeah. And other things. And that was always risky, especially for people in a family, because you've got healthcare and all those kind of other aspects as it would be. But it's funny because I actually got a job that was originally proposed as contract to hire. So I would go in as a contractor. I went through all the interview processes. And the last interview, I actually sat down with the VP of delivery for this organization. And I guess I'd done so well that he made the comment to me that, hey, if this contract to hire thing is a problem, let me know and we'll see what we can do. Yeah. Which I heard that and I took that to town and said, okay, I need this to be full-time. Yeah. I don't want to go through the contract to hire. And it worked for me. And I know that's a rare case and doesn't always happen that way. But I do believe that there, like you said, there's a lot of value in just looking at the contract to hire, because you do get to test something out and you get to try it out. As a consultant now, everything I do is almost contract to hire. It's not me doing it. It's my company that does all the contracting and all the hiring, but still it's nice to know that I go into a gig and I'm there for a period of time. And that at the end of that time, both me and the company that I'm working with, engaged with, has the opportunity to renew me. And either one of us can say no, which is great. So I applaud that idea of doing the contract to hire. And I definitely think it's something that people should consider, especially nowadays, where there's so much uncertainty, because a lot of companies are going to be very gun shy as well, I'm sure. Definitely.
Yeah. No, I agree with everything you just said. And I've seen similar situations that candidates have gone in and, sometimes it might be they have a competing offer that is full-time and the company doesn't want to lose out. So they're like, oh, well, if you've got a competing offer, then we'll make our offer full-time too. So there is sometimes a little bit of leeway with that. So I definitely agree with your story as well. That's awesome.
So let me ask you this. We went back and we talked about what you shouldn't be doing. We talked about what you should be doing. You mentioned a lot about the statistics and things like that. I had a past interview that I did, a couple of them actually, where they've talked about how they put those statistics in to their resumes to kind of pad it and make it look good. Hey, I did this much of completion of a marketing campaign. I raised this much money for the company, all those kind of big numbers. And they're always inflated. They're always rounded up. 11.2 becomes 15%, something like that, depending on how generous the person wants. How valuable are those statistics to the people that are actually doing the hiring, though? I know you use them to kind of identify key people, but the people that are actually doing the hiring, do they get as much into the statistics as you do, or they have different levels that they want to look at?
I think that's going to vary based on the role and based on the company. I've had some clients that have been very specific, like, well, I don't see, this is a very data driven role and we want to see results, and we don't see anything on the resume that slightly even refers to results. So they're an automatic pass. And so, whereas me, I'm like, okay, well, I had the conversation with them and I heard everything that they were saying. So I'll even go back to my candidate sometimes and say, hey, just so you know, you might want to add some of those things. And I do my best to relay all that over to the client. And I've relayed it over and said, this person did this marketing campaign, they did this. But because it's not on the resume, they're like, not on the resume, didn't happen. So that's going to be probably the more harsh side of things. Whereas others are a little bit more lenient and they're like, yeah, this looks pretty good. Like we'll bring so-and-so in and we'll at least have a conversation and see if we can learn a little bit more what's behind those different campaigns that they spoke about on their resume. So I think it really does just depend on the type of hiring manager. As a recruiter, sometimes, I've gotten to know my clients, and sometimes I'll even go back to my candidates and say, before even submitting you over to this client, I think it would be best in your best interest to just go ahead and tweak your resume here, there, and elsewhere so that you can really stand out. But it's really going to be based on client to client for sure.
That always frustrates me.
Yeah.
That idea that you have this great candidate, you've got this great person, you've talked to them, you've vetted them, and they're in your mind, they're a golden apple. They're really good. And then you pass the resume over. And because the resume is just a Granny Smith, which happens to be my least favorite apple, clarify there, the company just, no, hard pass, I'm done, because they didn't put all that stuff in there. But at the same time, we're told, keep your resume short. It used to be keep it to one page, which I gave up on that a long time ago. I'm like, one page, forget it. Now, I make typically the first page has the most rich data, and then pages 2 or 3 are less data, the more recent stuff. But what do you think about that strategy as well for people? Is how far back should they really be putting in that rich data for their past jobs, and how much of it can they just kind of like give like a little blurb on it?
Yeah. So kind of a rule of thumb that I utilize is if you've got less than 5 years experience, then you should probably keep your resume to one page. I think that after 5 years, that's when you can start to maybe break out to those 2 pages. But what I've always said, and I think I was very fortunate growing up, my dad was in HR. And so I was always constantly kind of hearing how to prepare myself for an interview, how to keep my resume up to date. I mean, even back when I was only doing internships, he was making sure that my resume looked perfect. I mean, I was a junior in college and had a better resume than probably some people that are out there right now, and I was very lucky and I recognize that. But what we always kind of say in the house is in my family's house is the resume lands you the interview. The interview is where you can further explain. So if you see, we don't want to see every single thing that you did the entire time that you were there. We want to see 5, maybe 6 bullet points of your top, performing things that you've done or your most notable achievements there. And then for your most recent role. And then as you go down to the roles that are less, what's the word?
Related?
Yes. Or yeah. Or even just like it's been 15 years or whatever, then that's where you start doing less bullet points because, the employer, that's awesome. If you worked for like a really major corporation and you did something really notable there, but it was 15 years ago, then fine. That's okay. Put that bullet point in there. But I mean, I would say, if you've been, your most recent gig should have the most bullet points, and that's kind of how you should go. And then lowering the number of bullet points as you go back in your work career is kind of how I was brought up doing. So that's just what we do, and it's been effective. Just because I think that if you've got too much on there and too many statistics, then they lose their meaning and they lose kind of the purpose of like drawing the actual hiring manager in.
How important do you feel that? Talking about resume formats and stuff like that, at the bottom of the resume, you've always got education, you've got extracurricular activities, you've got clubs that you're a part of, and you've got references.
Mm-hmm.
Those areas, how important are those really to have into your resume, and how much care should be put into the content that you put in those areas?
Yeah. So I think for any of your younger listeners that might be, a couple years out of college, then everything that for instance, I swam in college. I was on, the swim team there. I was in a sorority. So I was on the exec board for that. So for me, because, I'm still 5 years out of college at this point, I almost even thought about taking those bullet points off just because I was like, well, I'm 5 years out. Like, I don't know if they're still relevant. But then I was like, I'm still in my younger part of my career. So I think if you're still young in your career, highlighting those really cool things or really cool experiences that you did while you were in school are still going to be relevant. Now, if you're, 20 years out of college, just listing the name of the university where you went, and then, your major is fine. If you've gone back to school and gotten a master's or whatever the case may be, obviously adding that on there. Actually putting references on a resume. We don't see too much of that in my space, just because a lot of times the hiring manager will come back and ask for those references. So, you don't have to list their names right off the bat. That'll save you space. It'll save the hiring manager space. They're not there to really call on your references right away. That's usually going to be in the final round interview. So I would say, even just including, I think the bottom of my resume, I just have references available upon request. And that really just kind of keeps my resume, consolidated and to the point. Any extracurriculars, funny, when I was laid off for my week, I had a lot of people that reached out. Now they're like, well, now that you've got all this free time, I could use some help with my resume. And so that was a space that was a little bit harder for me to navigate, because what hiring manager might see as, not that great of an extracurricular could be somebody's like highlight of their, day-to-day life, that they've gotten involved in this, organization outside of work or whatever the case may be, where they feel like they're making a difference. So I always just kind of say, if you've got a story to tell and it can kind of showcase, your management style or your organizational, experience as well, keep it on there, because it's a conversation starter, and the hiring manager will most likely be like, well, tell me a little bit about this that you did. Like, why is that on here? And then you can kind of go into your experience and what you've done to make a difference with that organization.
I love that. So the idea is for those areas, once you've reached a point in your career, become your story and your passions, and they become those extra things that really show who you are as a person, which is great.
Yeah.
So I love that and everything. For resumes themselves, you mentioned that you were helping some friends out with their resumes, and you see on LinkedIn all the time people saying, let me help you with your resume. I'm a resume wizard. I make resumes awesome. Is there like a set format that really is kind of like standard? I know that when I was going through the process back in 2019, that my resume I had was so old that apparently the computer systems that would chug through them couldn't read it properly. And I would actually lose out on a scoreability, I guess, is what the recruiter told me. So they sent me a new format that I had to completely redo my whole resume into in order to make it more easily machine read. Since a lot of these things are kind of churned that way. Do you find the same thing, that there are certain formats that really pop? And do you know where people can go to find those formats?
So I haven't run into that as much. I have a family member that was laid off due to COVID, and she actually reached out to me asking me that same question. I think that for us, because we do work in the creative space, and like the marketing and advertising space, usually the platforms and the programs that people are utilizing to create their resumes are most up to date, just because they need those programs for their career. So like a lot of people are using, the Adobe Creative Suite to work on their resume if they're in the creative space. So and they, as a creative, they've got the most up-to-date platforms and programs anyway, because they use them on a day-to-day. But I've heard that, but I've not run into that myself on the staffing side, in terms of not being able to read somebody's resume or anything like that.
What do you feel like is the most important part of someone's resume?
Most important part, just relevant experience and the way that they format it. I think that to make it eye-catching, it doesn't have to be, it's not like eye-catching to us is that you're using, beautiful fonts and all of this. I mean, for me, I think keeping the resume professional looking is gonna do enough in terms of setting you apart. And making sure that your formatting is consistent throughout the entire thing. I mean, that's the thing. Somebody will start out with one format and then you're down to closer to the bottom of the resume, and it's obvious that as they've gone on in their career, they don't take the time to really look through and recognize, okay, so they're going in and updating their resume, but they're doing it by job type thing. And so they don't remember to go back at the very first and make sure that, the bullet points that they were using back in 2000 for one of their first roles is going to be different than the formatting that they're now using in 2020. So I think just taking the extra time to really make sure that your formatting is all the same, because especially in corporate roles that people are recruiting for, business-like roles, attention to detail goes a long way, right? Like a lot of hiring managers are looking for somebody that's organized and has that attention to detail. And that goes all the way down to the formatting and how clean the resume is. I've had hiring managers multiple times say, well, the experience is great, but they started out using periods at the end of every single, bullet point. And then toward halfway through the resume, they stopped. And that just shows a lack of attention to detail. So you wouldn't think that would be the most important thing, but it's knocked a lot of candidates out, and that I've seen thus far in my career, in terms of making sure that everything is fluid. So even though it's not results driven or it's not something specific that you've done, it definitely does show that you've taken the extra time to make sure that everything is formatted correctly.
Part of the goal of this podcast is what I call humanizing the hiring experience.
Yeah.
So the idea behind this is that we're giving a voice to people. So it's not just a paper resume. And that leads into the first interviews. That's the first chance that someone really gets, whether it be that first interview with a recruiter or that first interview with a hiring manager. It's the first opportunity they get to really show themselves. Mm-hmm. So what are some pointers that you have for people for those first calls where they're actually, especially in this COVID world, where now we're doing things over video chat? Yeah. A lot of times instead of face-to-face or over the phone. So what are some key things that you usually stress to your clients and people, or that you've seen from hiring managers that have been very effective?
So I'll kind of break it down into two parts. So even just with an initial interview with a recruiter, we know our clients very well. So we're not saying that you need to, suit and tie it on a video with us, but at least making sure that you're presenting yourself that you would in any other interview. I mean, I've had some interviews that were over video where all the lights were off and, they were in this dark room. And to me, I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't really show you presenting yourself very well. And so that making sure that even though we are just a recruiter or working for the staffing agency and not necessarily the company that you're going to end up at, we do make notes of that. And sometimes we won't even, send your information along to a client if we don't feel that you could be a good fit based off of how you presented in the actual, your presentation and initial run through. Because like I said, we know our clients and we know kind of what they're going to be looking for. And we know at the end of the day, who's going to make it onto the next round in a lot of cases. So, but I think going back to the more important, once you've landed the actual interview with the client, making sure that you're, especially in a COVID world where everything is digital, making sure that you are getting ready like you would for any other resume, prep or any other interview, making sure that you are preparing the exact same way. Even though you don't have the same personal, actually in person, get dressed all the way fully, don't just do the top thing, make sure that you're fully dressed and really, it gives you kind of like that feeling of confidence as well, that you're looking sharp, looking good for going into the interview. And then for the actual interview itself, I love, and I know that, clients also love this, come prepared with some questions at the end. There's nothing more awkward than when the interviewer says, do you have any questions? And they say, no, I'm good. And you're like, okay. Because usually, the interviewer is asking that because for you, it's just as much of an interview of your potential new employer. So whether that be, researching the company ahead of time, researching the actual person that you're interviewing with ahead of time. I do that a lot. I'll go onto their LinkedIn and say, hey, I saw that you started your career at XYZ company. What made you make the jump to want to work with the company that you're currently at? That they love, because you're asking them, why did you choose the company? Why did you stay? And then, additional questions that you might have about the team structure that you might end up on are always really good, because it goes to show that you're actually interested in the opportunity itself. So just coming fully prepared, whether that be, getting dressed to the nines or whatever the case may be for the interview, or just showing up with those questions, I think will definitely help kind of wow the interviewer that you're meeting with.
So I'm glad you brought up the questions, because that's something I'm always curious about. What do you think is like one question you wish candidates would ask more often that they're not asking?
Yeah. I always really like when candidates say, okay, so what are next steps? What can I expect? What is a timeline? Because for me, if you're not worried about the timeline and you're not worried about next steps, then you're not really that interested in the opportunity. So really just asking that question of, so, when are they looking to have this person in the seat, goes to show me that this person's actually really interested in the opportunity.
So don't be afraid to close. Don't be afraid to lock it up, as it would be. So that's good.
Yeah.
What's a question you wish they would stop asking you?
Oh, goodness. See, I don't really have any that I don't like. I love questions. And I mean, I'm always transparent with my candidates. If they ask me a question and I don't know it, then I'm like, look, I don't have that information. I can go and see if I can find it, whether it be, a managerial person or a director. And they're like, well, how big of a team at the end of the day am I going to be managing? And I have like a ballpark idea of the team number, but they want something, very tactical. I always go back and I find out the answer for them. So I honestly, as long as it's an appropriate question, I say just ask it. If you're curious about something, go for it. I always say shy away from, unless it's a recruiter question. When you hop on the phone with a recruiter, it's fair to ask, hey, what's the compensation for this? But once you get into an actual interview with a client, never talk compensation until you're, well on your way into final rounds.
All right. So the key question we ask all of our guests on the show: what was the last thing Cooper Kearns got from Amazon?
Oh my gosh. Wait, this is really funny. So I just recently, because of COVID, was using my lunch breaks to go on a lot of walks. And so I was, and now I'm in North Carolina, so it's very hot down here. And so my t-shirts weren't cutting it. So I actually just ordered myself a 5-pack of workout tank tops so that I can continue my walking during my lunch breaks, which when I was laid off, my lunch breaks pretty much became all day long. So I was just walking and I was like, oh, wow, I need more shirts. I didn't realize. So ordered a 5-pack of workout shirts so that I can walk the day away, I guess.
That's awesome. Now, if someone wanted to get a hold of you, Cooper, how's the best way for them to get a hold of you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and I pretty much connect with anyone that is looking to connect, just because as a recruiter, I want to try to help, even if it's not in my field. So Cooper Kearns is me on LinkedIn. Also, that's also a great thing that candidates can do as well, is if you ever connect with somebody, taking that extra minute to write a personal message of why you want to connect is huge. As a recruiter, I love when people send me that, like, hey, I see that you work for a creative staffing agency. I'm a budding graphic designer and I'd love to connect. I think that just, it's like sending a thank you note. It just goes the extra mile.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show to us. Congratulations on being rehired. I hope it continues and they continue to keep you there. If not, you always have a home to come back here and we can do another interview. But I really appreciated getting your insight in the recruiting world, especially on the creative and the advertising and marketing side of the house, which is an area that we haven't been able to touch on that much. So I really appreciate that as well. And it was really wonderful having you on today, Cooper.
Yeah, well, likewise. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to Fired Before Christmas. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode and getting to know my guests better. If you'd like to learn more about our show, please find us on the web at firedbeforechristmas.com. And any questions or interest in the show, please feel free to email me at host@firedbeforechristmas.com, or again, check out our website. Until next time, I'm your host, Eric Ryan Jones, and you've been listening to Fired Before Christmas.